What's up guys, my name is Ace, and today I wanted to talk about the minimap and the importance of the minimap in Call of Duty because a little while back there were some leaks from a Chinese leaker, and this leaker has got a lot of things correct about Modern Warfare so far, and one of the leaks from him suggests that there may not be a minimap in core game modes until you get a UAV up. This isn't hardcore, this is the regular core game modes. And this has sparked a debate within the community. I have mentioned this a couple times in a few of my previous Modern Warfare videos, but I just kind of touched on it briefly. So in today's video, I want to go into great detail here explaining why I feel the minimap is a very important element in Call of Duty and why I don't feel it should be removed. At this point, just keep in mind, this isn't confirmed yet. This is just a leak, just kind of a rumor so far. But in either case, I still wanted to share my 2 cents on this since I have seen quite a bit of a debate within the community. So in my opinion, the minimap is a core element of the Call of Duty gameplay, and it really highlights its arcade style, and it separates it from a lot of the other shooters on the market that don't have that sort of a minimap. With the way that Call of Duty works as an arcade-style game with those smaller sorts of maps, the minimap is the primary tool for that big picture awareness and big picture thinking, and it also allows for more complex decision making in the game because you have your awareness of your immediate surroundings, which is through your sight and sound. So with sight, that's limited to your field of view, which is quite small on console by the way, and then you have everything you can hear, so whether that be footsteps or gunfire, that's what your awareness is limited to without a minimap in COD. So the minimap adds that extra layer that allows your awareness to be extended to a larger area on the map, and this extended awareness means you're able to make complex decisions with more big picture thinking outside of your immediate level of awareness that you can see and hear. A common misconception with the minimap is that it's just used to chase dots. So anybody firing an unsilenced gun, for instance, they show up as a red dot on the minimap if it's an enemy. And the common misconception is it's just a really simple tool that you use to chase those dots and run mindlessly towards them. While this might be true at the really basic beginner level of play, this is a huge misconception when it comes to higher levels of play. The minimap is actually primarily used to see teammate positioning, and you can use that information for things like spawn prediction, reading spawn flips, flank awareness, so you can see if there's a potential hole in your defenses and an enemy could have gotten by your teammates, so you have to worry about your back. Map control, this is very important for understanding map control and where your team has that map control. And also it assists in your awareness of your immediate surroundings, so like the areas that you can see and hear. And by this, I mean if you hear a footstep behind you, for instance, you can have a quick glance at the minimap to see, is that a teammate that's standing behind me, or is there no teammate there, and that's definitely an enemy. Without that minimap showing you where your teammates are, you have to spin around constantly if you hear a gunshot behind you, or if you hear a footstep behind you. And I feel that's unnecessary, and that actually takes away from the gameplay itself. So properly utilizing a minimap, I'm not talking just chasing dots, but properly utilizing that minimap is absolutely a higher level skill. And most beginner players don't see this because there's simply too much going on for them. They have a hard enough time just dealing with their immediate surroundings, so they haven't gotten to that point where they're able to conceptualize that higher level thinking that comes with a minimap. So let's get into what I feel the consequences would be if you remove the minimap from core gameplay. First and foremost, I strongly believe this will lower the skill gap and lower the skill ceiling. Like I said, proper minimap utilization is a high-level skill used for big picture thinking and complex decision making. It takes time to master this, and therefore if you get rid of that minimap and you just throw that tool out, beginners would be benefiting from this the most because they don't really utilize the minimap properly anyways, so it doesn't really hurt them, but it does definitely hurt the players that are capable of utilizing the minimap properly. That's not to say that really skilled players wouldn't adapt to this and still be better players, but you would be taking a really big tool away from them, and you would compress the skill gap in that sense. In addition to this, removing the minimap would simply strip a layer of complex decision making from the game. It would simplify the game overall. I personally think of this as turning chess into checkers, for instance. You'd be dumbing the game down, and therefore this would become less enjoyable for skilled players. In my opinion, the overall gameplay would devolve into sort of a gunfight-to-gunfight style of gameplay, because you're only aware of your immediate surroundings without a minimap. That's all you can really be aware of, and this means there would be a lot less strategy and big picture thinking going on. It's just, where's my next gunfight coming from, and how am I going to win that gunfight? This change would also slow the gameplay down. The reason for this is if you reduce somebody's awareness of what's going on around them and going on around the map, this makes moving around the map more risky. You don't know if you have a teammate covering that lane. You don't necessarily know if there's a camper watching that lane. it's going to be more risky to make those moves, and therefore a lot of players simply won't make those moves, or they'll at least be more hesitant, which will slow them down. Additionally, camping won't be punished nearly as much because no dot appears when you fire your gun. As it is right now in Call of Duty, if you're camping in a building, for instance, let's just say you're camping up in a window and you're firing down on enemy players, you become a target pretty quickly and pretty easily. Without a minimap, yeah, you can still hear the person firing their gun, but you don't immediately see on that minimap whether that's a teammate or an enemy, and you may not be able to tell exactly which window they're in, or even exactly which building they're in if it's two buildings that are close to each other. You can just kind of hear they're generally somewhere in that area, so this makes it more powerful for campers, and it doesn't punish them nearly as much. Another way that this would slow the gameplay down is beginner players won't have a sense of direction. They won't have those dots to chase, and therefore they're more likely to either move aimlessly around the map because they don't know where to go to find the fights, or once again, they'll be too scared to move around the map because they won't know which direction they should be going, and once again, that'll lead to them just playing slower and most likely just camping harder. So there's no doubt in my mind at least that removing the minimap would absolutely slow the pace of the gameplay down. The next consequence is it would essentially kill the suppressor attachment. As it is right now in Call of Duty, there's an excellent balance with the suppressor attachment. Using a suppressor keeps you off the minimap when you fire your gun, unlike everybody else that doesn't have a suppressor, which is quite powerful, but that comes at the cost of reduced range, so therefore in certain situations it will take you that extra bullet to kill. This trade-off has always worked really well in Call of Duty in my opinion, and it allows players to customize themselves to go either like full-on stealth, so they sacrifice certain things to gain that stealth, or they can go more like loud and proud and just rushing in and getting that maximum damage range and everything. There was a balance between those playstyles, and removing the minimap would throw a lot of that off. Suppressors wouldn't be nearly as viable, and even if you're just making it so suppressors reduce the sound, within the Call of Duty size maps, you're still going to hear a suppressor user. If anything, I become more alerted when I hear a suppressor because that alerts me to the fact that there is a stealth player around and I have to be aware of that. So I feel the removal of the minimap would unnecessarily throw off that balance of stealth play versus the non-stealth play. Next up, removing the minimap would put a very heavy reliance on sound. And essentially, this would screw over anybody that doesn't use a headset. And Call of Duty has a very large casual audience that just plays on their TV, for instance. And if you take that minimap away, good luck to those players. They are going to be at an extreme disadvantage. As it is right now in Call of Duty, sound is always a bonus on top of everything else that's going on. It helps with your awareness, and it absolutely does give you an advantage, but it's not something you absolutely need to be successful and to understand what's going on around you. Without a minimap, you're pretty much screwed without a headset. You're going to have a very hard time. Next up, if they remove the minimap, this would just confuse a lot of players as well. I kind of hinted at this earlier on, but just think of yourself as you're playing Call of Duty. If you hear a gunshot behind you or a footstep behind you, in core game modes at least, your immediate response is check the minimap. Is there a teammate behind me or is there not a teammate behind me? And that will help you with that awareness of what's around you without having to spin around and actually look. If you take that minimap away, you have to turn around every single time you hear a footstep or a gunshot that is not within your immediate field of view, which, like I said at the beginning as well, traditionally, at least in Call of Duty for consoles, the field of view is quite limited. So it's not like in real life where you could just quickly turn your head while you're running. You can't do that. You literally have to turn your whole body around just to see, is that a teammate or is that an enemy? This would unnecessarily confuse players. The minimap was a great tool for us to quickly check that kind of stuff, and if you take it away, I feel like I'm going to have to pump my sensitivity up because I'm going to be spinning around all the time trying to see what's going on around me. Now we're getting towards the end of the list, but there's still a few other potential negative consequences of removing the minimap, and this next one is it would contribute to snowballing in games. So what I mean by that is once one team starts getting momentum and they start getting a lead, they just become more and more powerful, and it becomes harder and harder for the other team to dig themselves out of that. So assuming this would work like in hardcore where you don't get a minimap until you get a UAV, once one team starts getting UAVs up, it becomes easier and easier for them to continue looping through and getting more and more UAVs. And on the other side of that, it becomes harder and harder for you to go on that streak to get your UAV up. This would be especially bad if you're one of those solo players that always has a really hard time trying to carry those random teammates. This is going to make it so much worse for you because those random teammates that are feeding streaks to the enemy team, They are now going to be feeding mini-maps and UAVs to the enemy team, and you aren't going to have that for yourself, and it's going to be much more difficult for you to earn those UAVs against them. This would make a losing situation so much worse than it is if everybody at least has a mini-map and UAVs are more so a bonus on top of the mini-map. Leading off of this would make the UAV streak a complete crutch. Everybody would have to be using a UAV because it would be so much more powerful than it's ever been. Because not only are you just earning that sweep, you're earning a minimap. And a minimap is a very powerful tool, like I said earlier. And therefore, this would reduce streak diversity because now one of your streaks is set in stone as a UAV. If you're using anything else in that situation, you're doing it wrong. And that's how hardcore works, actually. Everybody basically has to use a UAV in hardcore. If you're not using a UAV in hardcore, in my opinion, you're making a horrible decision. UAVs are probably the most powerful streak to use in a mode that doesn't give you a minimap by default. And this brings us to the final consequence that I wanted to mention here. Of course, there's probably a few more that I could pull out if I really wanted to, if I wanted to stretch a little bit. But this last one is it would reward partied up players more than ever. So I'm talking those pre-made teams that have microphones and are communicating with each other. As it is right now in Call of Duty, those teams already have a huge advantage and they're most likely to win all of their games anyways. But now it's going to reward them more than ever because communication will be so important. And on that same note, you might have people that'll say, oh, maybe this will encourage people to actually use their microphones in random games. I don't think that's realistic. This is Call of Duty we're talking about. That has never been a core part of Call of Duty. You're more likely to get harassed or yelled at or have some screaming or annoying thing in the microphone than any sort of proper team communication with randoms. So as a result, like I said, those partied up players are going to be more powerful than ever if there's no minimap by default. I guess I'll tag one last thing onto the end of these consequences, is this would simply anger a lot of players. This is a core feature, a core element that's been in Call of Duty, I believe since COD 4, since we've had a proper minimap, and it's one of the reasons that people play Call of Duty rather than some other game like Battlefield. We like that arcade style, we like that sort of big picture thinking that comes with a minimap on top of being aware of our surroundings, so why change a core element that's not broken? Keeping the minimap in the game, I don't think will upset anybody because it's a core aspect of Call of Duty. Removing it only serves to anger a lot of people. So those would be the key consequences, in my opinion, if they were to remove the minimap from core game modes in Modern Warfare this year. However, I have seen a lot of debates online, and I have had a few little debates here and there with people on like Reddit, for instance, about this minimap removal. And at the end of the video here, I wanted to address a lot of the common arguments on the other side of things. That just makes it so it's easier so I don't have to respond to quite as many comments down below because I already kind of know a lot of the comments that'll be coming. So I just wanted to address those and share my thoughts on those arguments. So the first argument I wanted to look at is it will actually increase the skill gap if you remove the minimap. It won't decrease the skill gap like I've suggested. Well, my response to this one is pretty simple. There is no proper replacement for big picture awareness and big picture thinking outside of that minimap or proper team communication, which, as we already discussed in a random public match, that is a laughable concept to expect proper team communication. So there is no proper replacement for that minimap when it comes to big picture awareness. Also, learning how to properly utilize the minimap, not just chasing dots like I said at the beginning, but properly utilizing that for spawn prediction and map control and being aware of the flank and knowing where your teammates are watching so you know where you have to fill in and watch. This is a skill that most beginner players will struggle with, or they just can't grasp that because there's too much going on around them, and therefore they're just so focused on dealing with the basics of trying to win gunfights. So removing that minimap strips a layer of strategy and skill that higher skilled players will utilize against lower skilled players. It's actually quite simple. Who checks a minimap more in a game? Who uses the minimap more in a game? The guy that's on the top of the lobby or the guy at the bottom of the lobby? Go and watch some Twitch streams of some really skilled players that are consistently leading lobbies and pay attention to their eyes. You will see just how often they're checking their minimap. It is a lot, and it is consistent. Every one of those players is checking the minimap almost as often, sometimes more often, as they're checking what's actually going on around them. They've absolutely mastered the basics to the point where they can deal with that kind of stuff in their peripheral vision, and they're more so looking at the big picture and the deeper, more complex game. It is a higher level tool that higher skilled players utilize, not lower skilled players. Therefore, removing it takes a tool away from the higher skilled players, and this lowers the skill gap. Now, the next argument, and this is a really big one that people will use, is the minimap is just a crutch. And I completely disagree with this. Like I said, I see the minimap as a core element of the gameplay, not a crutch. But in order to have a look at this and break this down, the term crutch is often used in two different ways when it comes to gaming. The first way that it's used to define an element of the game that is necessary for use in order to remain competitive. So this would be the thing like toughness from Black Ops 2, where it reduces your flinch, or dead silence. A lot of people would refer to those as crutches because if you're not using them, you're simply putting yourself at a big disadvantage in an environment where other people will be using those. That definition doesn't really apply to this case. In this case, the people that are calling it a crutch are referring more so to the definition that a crutch is something that lesser skilled players rely on in order to compete with others that aren't using that crutch. This is more true to the definition of what a crutch would be, so we'll just say that lesser skilled player, that's somebody with a broken leg. Therefore, they need a crutch in order to compete with the people that don't have a broken leg, the people that are more skilled at the game. When you're looking at this definition, it's actually really simple to test whether or not something is a crutch. If you remove that element from the game, does this increase or decrease the skill gap? I believe I've already made a really strong argument for this. Removing the minimap would decrease the skill gap. This would hurt the highly skilled veteran players far more than any beginners out there because the higher skilled veteran players are the ones utilizing this more than the beginners out there. The minimap adds complexity and adds skill to the game. It adds an entire level of complex decision making. Taking the minimap away would take that entire layer of the game away, and therefore, I don't see how this could possibly be referred to as a crutch. If anything, it's more of a hammer and you're hitting the higher skilled players in the knee to break their leg and bring them down to the level of the beginners. This brings us to the next argument that I often see for removing the minimap, and this one I think is a little bit silly, but I have seen it a lot, and a lot of players will say, well, I don't even use it. I don't even look at it. It's just distracting, so I don't mind if they remove it. Well, I hate to sound harsh here, but that's likely because you haven't mastered the basics yet, so it would be too distracting to be looking at another layer of strategy on top of what's going on around you. Like I said, it takes a lot of time and skill to be able to properly utilize that minimap. You really have to practice that, and you have to be able to absolutely master the basics before you get to that level where you can properly read and utilize the minimap. So just because you don't use or you don't like a particular tool in the game, that doesn't mean that that tool should be taken away for the people that do use that tool. Next up, another really common argument that I see in favor of removing the minimap in core game modes is, I play hardcore, so I actually like this change. And with this one, there is a reason a minority of the player base plays hardcore. Yes, some of it is due to the reduced health. A lot of people don't like that reduced health, but a lot of COD players clearly prefer having a minimap. That's why they stick to core game modes. Hardcore likely isn't going anywhere this time around with Modern Warfare, so if you don't like the minimap, stick to hardcore. That's what hardcore has always been for. You have your mode, let everyone else have theirs. I'm not going and lobbying for changes to the hardcore mode because I simply don't really play hardcore all that much. Yeah, I hop in from time to time and it is a nice change of pace every once in a while, but I prefer core modes. I prefer having a minimap all the time. I totally understand and realize why people like hardcore and they like not having that heads-up display, and therefore I'm not going to go there and try and suggest that all hardcore modes should suddenly have a minimap and a full heads-up display. That wouldn't be fair to those hardcore players that enjoy that. So on the other side of things, I don't feel it's fair for hardcore players to try and change the core mode that the majority of the player base plays. You have your mode, we have ours. Stick to yours and we'll stick to ours. And the final argument that I often see that I wanted to address here in favor of removing the minimap for core modes is this would be a great change because it's more realistic, or they might not use the word realistic, they'll say it's more tactical. It'll make for more tactical gameplay. I will say right up front, you're right, that would make it more realistic and more tactical. It would slow the pace of the game down. It would completely change the gameplay style of Call of Duty. And that's one of the reasons that I feel this would be a horrible idea. Call of Duty is an arcade-style shooter, and this is one of its key differentiating factors from other FPS games on the market. It's one of the reasons that Call of Duty players are Call of Duty players, and they enjoy this game instead of others. I feel this is actually one of the big reasons that Call of Duty has been struggling in previous years, is they've been taking far too much inspiration from other games instead of focusing on what Call of Duty is good at. And therefore, they're losing a lot of their dedicated fans that like Call of Duty and not these other games. So realism, at least relating to gameplay, I can understand the argument for realism when it comes to like realistic graphics and all that kind of stuff. That's great, that's fine, I understand that. But when it comes to gameplay, Call of Duty isn't and has never really been a realistic shooter. It's an arcade style shooter. If you want a bit more realism, go over to Battlefield. If you want to take it another step further, go play a milsim like Arma. Also, just another note for that, if you want that more realistic experience without a mini-map, go play Hardcore. That's what Hardcore is and always has been for. It's for that more realistic style gameplay where you don't have that heads-up display, you don't have that mini-map. And I have seen some people come back here and say, well, I want that realism, but I don't like the really low health of Hardcore. Well, do you want realism or do you not want realism? That reduced health in Hardcore is supposed to simulate the fact that if you get shot, it will take you out of the fight very quickly. It's not going to take you 6 or 7 shots, or in the case of Black Ops 4, 9 to 11 shots to get a kill on somebody. You drop them quickly. That's more tactical. So if you're looking for realism and tactical gameplay, go play Hardcore. Leave core modes the way they are. And with that, I think it's finally time to wrap up this video. I know it's a long one, but I'm very passionate about Call of Duty gameplay, and I feel the minimap is and always has been a core element of the Call of Duty gameplay experience. And it's one of the contributing factors to the success of that Call of Duty gameplay. I feel removing it would be a horrible decision and it would negatively affect the franchise. And as a result, I am really hoping that these leaks and rumors are false. Maybe I made this video for nothing. I think at the end of the day, I think it's great to reinforce the fact that the minimap is a great part of Call of Duty, at least in my opinion. Of course, you can still feel free to disagree and let me know why you disagree in the comment section down below. But I'm really crossing my fingers and hoping they don't make any significant changes to the minimap in Modern Warfare. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.